Hello everybody, welcome to our webinar on dealing with the overwhelm. This is one of a series of webinars that we're doing. We currently cover behaviour and personality change, how to manage fatigue, how to live with uncertainty, and our programme is expanding because we're getting some experts to come and deliver some on topics that we know are relevant to you, our community. We've got one on seizures, diet and nutrition's coming up, imaging, scans, all the topics that we know are relevant and meaningful to you. And if you have any ideas of a webinar, then please get in touch with Jodie or myself. So I'm Helen, I'm Director of Policy and Services for brainstrust, and Jodie is a support specialist who supports everybody in the Midlands living with a brain tumour. But currently, because of COVID-19, we're covering the whole of the country between us because unfortunately we've had to furlough some of our support team. So let's get on with today's agenda. Dealing with the overwhelm. What I will say is that all of our, can you just go back to the beginning slide, Jodie? Thank you. all of our webinars are very relatable to living with a brain tumour. We know at the moment that everybody is, actually being overwhelmed with mindfulness apps, with how to deal with the existential global crisis that's going on around us. But what we do is take the topics that we know can be transformative to you and really explore in some detail why it is different when you're living with a brain tumour. We know, for example, that living with fatigue when you have a brain tumour is different from just living with fatigue. There's a whole host of other things that come into play that make things very complex for people living with a brain tumour. I also want to mention you can download our know-how on how to deal with the overwhelm. Our know-hows are information sheets, and we publish them to help people who are living with a brain tumour to understand current topics, and they're produced with input from relevant scientific and clinical experts, and we write them in a way that should help you to understand better topics that are often very complicated. So you can find those on the website, but also the last slide in this webinar will direct you to them. The other thing I want to say is that this webinar, like a lot of our webinars, comes from a coaching workshop that usually lasts around 3 hours. Our coaching workshops give everybody an opportunity to meet face to face, but also we'd hope that you'd come away in a much better place where you're feeling more resilience and more resourced to deal with the challenges that living with a brain tumour throws at you. But we know when running a webinar, we only have an hour. People's concentration time when you're looking at PowerPoint slides is not that long. So really, this is just looking at the tip of the iceberg. And if today's webinar raises issues with you or things that you would like further input on, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with Jodie or myself, and we can do a follow-up telephone call or email with you. And we'd like to see you at some more of our webinars too. Okay, Jodie, next slide. So etiquette, this isn't really relevant today. This is a pre-recorded webinar, but what we like to do is to run webinars as an interactive workshop. So we talk about the position as the audience, there'll be some information from us, and then normally what would happen is we would invite people to participate either using the chat button or just chatting away to each other about the relevance and how they are dealing with the overwhelm or strategies they use. Sometimes we actually do a coaching session. So this slide is in here, but it's probably not going to be really relevant today because today your position as an audience is obviously just listening to Jodie and I run through this pre-recorded workshop for you. Okay, so let's move on to the nitty-gritty of this webinar. What does it feel like to be overwhelmed? Well, it can be a negative or a positive feeling. Sometimes we're overwhelmed with emotion if somebody does something that's very generous or kind-hearted, particularly at the moment. Even the small things they can do, like making somebody a cup of tea, sometimes that can be overwhelming if you feel that you've given so much of your time and of your personal being to somebody else just to have an act of kindness done. Sometimes that can trigger an emotion, and that's a positive feeling, being overwhelmed. But what does it feel like when it's negative? Well, It can cause depression and anxiety. You can be angry, irritable, or restless, can't really settle to anything or focus. And feeling overwhelmed often leads to just packing stuff in altogether, so you're totally unmotivated or unfocused. You can't really concentrate on any one thing. You might be picking up little bits and pieces, but never actually completing a task. And that can also add to a feeling of being overwhelmed, because suddenly you're surrounded by everything that's unfinished and it feels like things are unraveling. It can cause trouble sleeping, or maybe you're sleeping too much if you stay in bed, because it's just easier to stay in bed than it is to get up and face the overwhelming stuff that you have to do. It can cause racing thoughts or constant worry. You can't escape from it. And then problems too with your memory or concentration, because you've got so much going on inside your head, let alone the brain tumour, but you can't actually focus or see a way through. And that can lead to making bad decisions, which of course then pile in, creating a greater sense of being overwhelmed. What do I do when I'm overwhelmed? Well, I procrastinate. I don't tackle stuff. I think stuff's such a good word. It's all too much. And we find we don't have the mental capacity to stay in the present and process what's going on and plan a way forward, so that we're not stuck in this downward spiral of feeling increasingly overwhelmed. So Jodie, in the second half of this webinar, is going to give you a strategy to show how you can break this downward spiral, and show you how you can make sure that your not to-do list is bigger than your to-do list. And that's what this webinar is about. But let's look at it in the context of living with a brain tumour. Jodie, could we go to the next slide? How is it different for those of us that are living with a brain tumour? Well, already when you're living with a brain tumour, you have that low level stress all of the time. It could be related to epilepsy. If you're experiencing seizures, you don't actually know when you're going to have a seizure. So you don't know if it's safe to go and have a bath or go out for a walk alone. You're never quite sure when the epilepsy might strike. There is too anticipation of feeling poorly. You know, if you're on chemotherapy, will this next dose be the one that takes me over the edge? So far, I've tolerated it well. Or, you know, with radiotherapy, we know that it's a cumulative treatment. And as time goes on, first 2 or 3 weeks, you might feel fine. But as time goes on, gradually the radiotherapy will take its toll. Does every symptom, you know, if you have that sudden headache or that sickness, does that mean that my tumour is progressing? You've then got scans. If you're on interval scanning, sometimes it feels like you can never escape from it. You have scans every 3 months and then you have to wait for the results. It feels like you're always living in the shadow of having scans. Things like, are there big events coming up? You might have a holiday booked, or, you know, you might have a birth of a baby, or you might want to walk your daughter down the aisle at the wedding. There might also be issues to do with work. You're not sure if you're going to be able to return to the job that you were doing, or even maintain the job that you're currently doing, and looking at the toll that takes. So when you're living with a brain tumour, there's a huge amount of complexity that comes into play. And all of these, if you take them en masse, can just chip away at our resilience and our ability to feel resource. And gradually, we just feel more and more overwhelmed. And even the simplest things that we used to do that were habit suddenly don't get done. And what you see then around you is all the things you're not doing rather than the things that you can. And don't forget too that as human beings, we tend to have a negative bias in our thinking. You'll remember 100 things that people have said that are negative or judgmental, but you won't remember the 200 wonderful things people have said about you. And that's just human nature. So just bear in mind that negativity, that negative bias that we tend to have in our brains. Okay, so next slide, Jodie. Let's look at why dealing with the overwhelm is often a significant factor that comes into play when you're living with a brain tumour. Well, there's time. Let's change your perspective on time, for example. For people living with a brain tumour, There's the pressure of managing your day-to-day time. And if your agenda and your days were already busy before you were diagnosed with a brain tumour, you now have another layer that's been laid over the top of this. And if your days were packed full, then sometimes having an additional thing to deal with can be the thing, you know, that the straw that breaks the camel's back, and that's when the cracks begin to appear. So you've got the pressure of managing your day-to-day time, fitting in additional appointments, you know, maybe you're having to take medication, keeping track of your medication. If you're a caregiver, you're constantly looking out for the person that you're, you know, the loved one that you're looking after, making sure that they've got every need, trying to anticipate things before they happen. But when you're living with a brain tumour, there's also the pressure of what we call teleological time. So telos means end, or your goal or your purpose, and logos is reason or explanation. So it actually makes us think about our mortality. Have we left a big enough footprint? Will I achieve everything I want to in the time I have left? What is my legacy that I'm going to leave behind me? I've got 101 things on my to-do list. Am I going to get them all done? Which ones are the most important ones? I want to spend as much time as I can with my loved ones. Is that going to happen? So you've also got that additional consideration of time that you need to bring to the table. Your day-to-day time, your pace of life will have increased. Our pace of life generally has increased dramatically. And when you're living with a brain tumour, sometimes it feels like we're out of step with the world around us. But even before the diagnosis, how often did we just sit and watch the clouds evolve or change shape, or sit and distinguish the different birds' songs? And when is your pause in your day? When do you disconnect from your mobile phone or your computer? So living in the moment too can change our relationship with life, because we begin to see with new eyes that time slows and life falls into place. And I'm just thinking about the impact that having to stay at home during COVID-19 has had. I noticed, for example, how loud the birds are. It's not that the birds have suddenly become loud, it's just that they've always been loud, but I've never stopped to sit and listen to them. And now I can begin to distinguish the different bird songs that are out there. Stress too. Stress is not all bad. What makes it bad is our attitude towards it. So you're stressed that you have a consultation coming up. What is stressful about it? Just ask yourself. You've told yourself this will be a bad experience. How about if you were to use your stress to take some ownership of this situation? What would need to happen for you to walk away feeling that it was time well spent? What would be of real value to you? What would be a good outcome for this appointment? What do you want to walk away knowing that you didn't know before? So use stress as a positive. See the problems as opportunities. Our perception of tasks too. It's human to end up with tasks that are both important, but also totally irrelevant. So we need to do a spring clean every now and then to stay focused on the meaningful stuff. And one of the things I say to myself is when I'm faced with a long list of jobs, that there has to be progress on something every day. And I just decide what that one something is. And that can help too, because at the end of the day, then I have a sense of achievement. I did actually tackle a task. And isn't it amazing how what was so important one week suddenly has no significance the next? Get your tasks, drop them under one of 4 headings: do, delegate, defer, or drop. So that's do, delegate, defer, or drop. When we reach our end of life, no one has regretted no getting through the to-do list, but they have regretted not spending time on what mattered or being with people who matter. Our approach to the day too, science backs this one up. We're all wired, I've already mentioned this, we're all wired with a negativity bias. It means we don't appreciate the good things, what works, what we have, but just focus on what we don't have, what's broken. We've lost so much already when living with a brain tumour, but we still have so much too. Some is new and better and stronger. Take 2 minutes at the end or start of the day just to think about what you do have that you can appreciate, and hold those thoughts throughout the evening before you go to bed. Our relationship with ourselves too. We've got so used to thinking of ourselves as machines that perform tasks to get us through the day. But our body is something magical. It also guides us and protects us. And when we don't take care of it, we can get disconnected from the larger meaning of our lives. Any machine will fail under stress. You can't stay revved up in the longer term. Unless we listen to our bodies and respect the need for some rest and recuperation, life will overwhelm us. Be human. Accept yourself for all that you are and gift yourself respite. I was talking to a patient last week. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink. In the last 12 months alone, she's had 2 craniotomies for her brain tumour and a course of radiotherapy in the year. Her last craniotomy was in March, and she called me about end of April. She's wondering why she feels so fragile and not like her old self. This was 3 weeks after her second operation. So when we had the discussion, she was able to step back. She'd been so focused on her operation in March. She hadn't got that critical distance to what had happened to her in the last year. Well, 1 course of radiotherapy alone is the equivalent of major surgery. So in the last 12 months, she's had the equivalent of 3 major operations. And she's wondering why physically she doesn't feel how she thinks she should. And just having that conversation with her and building in that time for self-reflection enabled her to re-establish her relationship with herself and understand that she was demanding too much of her body. Right, so I'm going to hand you over to Jodie now. Jodie's going to start talking about the strategies that can help you deal with the overwhelm. And by building in different strategies, they will help you to deal with situations that you feel overwhelming. But enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Jodie now. Thanks, Jodie.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, so as Helen said, we're just going to talk through some strategies that you might find will help. So for the next part, you will need some post-it notes, some bits of paper and a pen. So for this exercise, you can either do this alone or you can do this with somebody else as well. Okay, so to start off, the first question to ask yourself would be, what are you struggling with the most? Okay, so get your post-it notes and your pen and write down, list all of the things that you are struggling with and put each one on a separate post-it note. By separating these things out and writing them down, this can help us to clearly identify what it is that is making us feel overwhelmed. If you find that you have written one thing down, see if you can break it up a bit more. So is there one big decision that you have to make in relation to your brain tumour diagnosis? And actually, how can you break this down into smaller chunks? So what decisions do you need to make to help with this end goal? So once you've written down what you are struggling with, look at them and divide them into 2 groups. Things that you can't influence and things that you can. Often when dealing with overwhelming situations, we'll find that there is a mixture of things that we can't influence. And sometimes these are the things that we can actually feel more overwhelming. Looking at the things that you can't influence, put them to one side, park them. Focus on the things that you can influence. Once you've got your list of the things that you can influence that are making you feel overwhelmed, take a look at them. Can you break them down any further? Are there any other tasks related to these things that you can do, that you can map out? Once you feel like you've written everything down, map them into a timeline of when you are going to do them. If some of them don't have set deadlines, have a think at which ones you feel you would want to do first that can make you feel less overwhelmed. Which ones feel like the easiest ones to tackle at the moment for you? Put them into your own personal timeline. Once you've put them in this timeline, take another look at them. Put them somewhere clearly where you can see them, either on a table or a wall. Are there any other tasks that you can let go? Now that you have your list of tasks and actions, have a think, who is in your team? Often when situations feel overwhelming, it's very easy to feel like you're alone and that you have to deal with everything yourself. Have a think about who is around you and who can help you with these things. This can include family members and friends, but also your medical team, charities like Brainstrust, online groups. There are lots of different sources that you can tap into to help you with these things that you are finding overwhelming. So once you've got your actions, delegate who can help you with each of these. Communicate, prioritize, and share out tasks. What information is missing that you need to complete these tasks or make decisions? And who can help with these? Often when we find things overwhelming, self-care can sometimes move to the bottom of our list. Now that you have identified what it is that you are struggling with the most, you've written it down, you've mapped it into a timeline, and you've identified who can help you, it's time to build in time for yourself into your daily routine. What makes your heart sing? What things can you do that you can build into your daily routine that give you the space and the time to be able to take a step back and deal with those things that you find overwhelming? It could be as simple as sitting in a nice chair and having a hot drink, watching something on the television that you enjoy, or taking a short walk. Build time into your day for mindfulness and relaxation. Have a think, what is your sanctuary? What gives you the strength to continue? It may be that if you enjoy exercise or walking, this could be something that you can build into your daily routine. But especially when living with a brain tumour diagnosis, exercise and rest can come hand in hand. For each time you are active and have exercise, make sure you factor in time for rest, time for you as well.
Thanks, Jodie. That was great. Jodie, could you just flick back to the photograph where we go into the strategies? Thank you. So this gives you a visual example for those of you that might have difficulty thinking, well, what does this look like? This is when I was just overwhelmed. Each of those little yellow post-it notes are things that I had to do. So one of them, for example, the sheet June the 4th was planning a behaviour and personality change workshop. I had some data analysis to do. I had to write a chapter on activities of daily living and quality of life. I'm just thinking, can't see what, know-hows on how to deal with recurrence. I think I've still got that one to do actually. A know-how on how to live with uncertainty, a know-how on to build a team around you. So you can see that I just got so overwhelmed that I put each of those things on a post-it note, and then the June 2, June 3, June 4, those are the 3 weeks coming up in June, and then which are the things I could put back to later in the summer. August is typically quiet for us because everybody seems to be on holiday. So I managed to put in some there. So that gives you a visual idea of what it could look like. Could we go back to the takeaways, Jodie? Thank you. Now, I'm aware too that those things that I've shared with you just then, a lot of them were quite pragmatic, you know, they're just activities or tasks that I had to do. And very often when we're running this particular workshop, we appreciate that some of the overwhelm is emotional. Sometimes, you know, we had one lady who said she's just overwhelmed because she couldn't cope with the thought of losing her father. So you can still unpack that and break it down. So what specifically was making her feel overwhelmed about the thought of losing her father? And it came down to it was fear, basically. She was fearful that his end of life wouldn't be how he wanted it, and would she have the resources and the things, the team that she needed around her to be able to help him have the end of life so that he could have his best possible day. because it's still possible at end of life to have everything you want around you. And then she was also fearful of the way she would handle her emotions. And sometimes just by unpacking that emotion that is overwhelming, or actually specifically, what about that is making you feel overwhelmed? Just the task of unpacking that with somebody can help. So, you know, please don't hesitate to email Jodie or myself, or we can book a phone conversation with you to help. So these are the key takeaways. Change the "I'm too busy" narrative. It's all about reframing. We're never too busy to do what's important. So remember what I said about the you know, which are the things that you have to do, which are the things you can delegate, which are the things you can defer to later on, and which are the things you can drop. So do, delegate, defer, and drop. See problems as opportunities. There is always an opportunity in a problem. Always. Just try and reframe it and shut the negative chatter away in your head. Simplify, prioritize, you know, task setting. In our fatigue resource, which you can download from the website, there's a whole section on how you can simplify, prioritize, and pace yourself. So pick the things that are important. Resetting our mental clock too, and listening to our body. There's a magical moment for me at the end of the day. You know, you've had a busy day, full on interaction with people, whether we're working from home or out and about, and you get back, and around sort of 6:30, 7 o'clock, after the dog's been walked, there's that shift. It's only about half an hour where you're just beginning to step away from your busy day and just into the relaxation of evening. So that's my pause. That's the moment in the day where I stop and I reflect on the day. What did I achieve? What's still to be done? What's my priorities for tomorrow? And I just take half an hour out to reset my mental clock. So think about, where are your pauses in your day? Because that's when that will happen. And then listen to your body too. And I think, you know, you don't have to do all of these. Maybe just pick one to help you start tackling the overwhelm. We could go to the next slide. Jodie, just been talking about Jodie. So the joys of working from home. I thought this was a lovely quotation, and I think you'll know that you've won the overwhelm when you begin to focus again on those things that make your heart sing, those things that Jodie has mentioned to you. I mean, for me, it's just sitting, looking out at the sea. I'm very privileged to live where I do, but just taking that moment to sit and watch the tide come in and out. Yeah, so it's a lovely quotation to finish on. Right, last slide. So here are the links we talked about. They are on our website. There's a know-how section there. We've got quite a lot there now. And please, if there are any know-hows that you think would be really useful, they're very short. They're just usually 2 sides of A4. I think the driving one is a lot longer. But if there's any that you feel are missing that would be really useful, or if you want to help us develop any of these resources, we're always looking for volunteers. So you've got our telephone number there. Email, you can hello@brainstrust. It comes through to me, and then Jodie and I can be there to support you. Jodie, is there anything you wanted to add?
I just think, as you know, as we are all currently adapting to a slightly different way of living, it's taking the time out to for yourself, and just to see what can help. And if you do, as Helen said, if you do have any other questions following this webinar, please do give us a call. But also, if you have tried any strategies that we've mentioned, or any new ones that you've developed yourself, we would also like to hear about that as well. So get in touch with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Jodie. And thank you, everybody, for taking time to listen to this webinar. And as I say, any feedback, it's always welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.